Hello, I am so happy to be with Sara Billups today to talk about her new book, Nervous Systems, Spiritual Practices to Calm Anxiety in Your Body, the Church and Politics. And I'm sure nobody here actually watching this video experiences any anxiety, right, in this in this moment. But before I chat with Sara, I want to just introduce her properly. Sara Billups is a Seattle-based writer and cultural commentator. We met a couple of years ago at the Festival of Faith and Writing.
Mhm.
Sara's work has appeared in the New York Times, Christianity Today, Aspen Ideas, and other outlets. Sara writes Bitter Scroll, a monthly Substack letter, and co-hosts the podcast That's the Spirit. That's why your setup looks so like professional.
Totally from the podcast, yep. Yeah.
Sara earned a Doctor of Ministry in the Sacred Art of Writing at the Peterson Center for the Christian Imagination at Western Theological Seminary. Her first book, Orphaned Believers, follows the journey of a generation raised in the 80s and 90s of evangelicalism. And I actually got to hear you, Sara, talk about. Wait, was that the first time we met?
That's when we first
Okay.
met, yeah, in Cincinnati.
Okay. I forgot what preceded what, but actually, Sara came to speak about orphan believers at a small local gathering in Cincinnati.
So
So that's
fun.
where I met her. And then we followed up that conversation, I guess, at the Festival of Faith and Writing. And so now we're talking about your second book, Sara. So welcome so much.
Wow.
Welcome to this conversation, and thanks so much for being here.
Jen, it's so fun to talk to you. Thanks for having me. And can I confess something? I realized I was driving to see my dad today, and I thought, "Oh, wait a second. Jen is actually referenced in the book, like, in my embodiment book.
Yes.
You were, like, in the book," and I honestly hadn't thought about it until this morning. So I wonder if that
Well,
was that unexpected? I would have mentioned
that
it if I'd thought of it. Isn't that
That
funny?
was completely unexpected. Well, as I was confessing to you when we started this conversation, my last week just got a little bit, a little bit wonky because I was hosting a baby shower. And so I didn't get through all my work that I wanted to. And so I was trying to finish your book this morning. And then I had a sick kid. And so I was finishing it, midday and sending you the questions. And I'm like, and it was literally, I think, after I initially texted you or emailed you to say that the questions were coming late, that I was reading that section, and I thought, oh my goodness, thank you so much for talking about desire.
Totally. How could I write the book without talking about holy desire? It feels very essential. So
Mm.
thanks for your work. It's really cool to talk to you.
Well, we really could probably spend this entire conversation talking about the exercises, the Ignatian exercises, because that
Yeah.
taps so much into the conversation about holy desire, and I want to get there, but we won't spend the whole conversation there. um, but I just thought it was really interesting as I opened your book a couple weeks ago. You start with Jesus preaching the Sermon on the Mount and talking about do not worry, and
Mm.
that feeling like an impossible command. And
Yeah.
I was so struck by the fact that I had just turned in a second round of edits for my book. And that's exactly where I started my book. My
Hmm.
book that's, forthcoming next year is to talk about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount and the command, do not worry, do not be anxious. So
Same
it made
wavelength. Okay.
I
Yeah.
well, but I also thought, I don't think it's just us two. And I thought we could just start here. Why are we feeling anxiety in this moment?
Hmm.
And why do you think we're feeling the need to address it as spiritual formation writers?
Yeah. It's funny. Just last night, our friend John Guerra was in town, did a concert, and
Hmm.
he has the song from his new album that talks about the birds and the lilies, and he was saying the same thing. And I thought this is, obviously there's a pattern for a reason.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think for much of my life, I had assumed anxiety was largely individual and didn't think much about it on the macro level. But we live in a particularly anxious age, I would argue. And I think that so much of the common way we show up in community and with friends and family is really linked to how well we're formed. And I think that practices that show us how to be better formed and show up in a particularly anxious age are pretty vital. So the book talks
Hmm.
about personal anxiety, but then also the body politic and the church body. And so I began to kind of think about how my own experience kind of informs or scales or reflects against kind of these other bigger systemic anxieties, I suppose. So even
Hmm.
if you're not personally anxious, I was talking to my friend Kevin Makins, who has a church up in Toronto, and he said, I don't personally struggle with anxiety, but my church does, and thinking about political anxiety like that very much is interesting. So I hope that the book is appealing to folks that are in an anxious age, aka everybody, and as well as folks who may be individually struggling with anxiety too.
Mm. Well, I do want to kind of sort out early in our conversation the difference between like an anxiety disorder, which
Yeah.
you talk about suffering from that,
Hmm.
versus just like this more kind of common. I mean, it's low grade. It's probably also a blazing fever of anxiety for a lot of different people. But talk us through a little
Hmm.
bit about the difference between those two.
Yeah, I think about how we're all born from our cave person self being, concerned about being eaten in a cave. We all are born with some sort of protective state. I think that my volume, I think for people that struggle with anxiety, it's kind of like I think about it as a radio, and my volume gets pretty high and sometimes the knob kind of falls off, And
Mm,
I think anxiety is this universal way we're all collectively respond and personally respond to uncertainty or overwhelm. And so it's very universal and part of being human. But then I think that clinical anxiety is diagnosable, and it's a mental health disorder that doesn't necessarily revolve or when a certain particular question is reconciled, it might not resolve. So it's something that can affect relationships, how we move in the world. We can carry it in our body. So it's something that's longer and deeper than something that might resolve after a specific anxious situation or situation of worry, I guess.
mm. When I don't know if you actually talk about your diagnosis, like the origin of it and how
Hmm.
old you were. Did you? And did I miss that?
I'm not sure. No, I don't know that I talk about it specifically. I mean, in the book, I might talk about how I was clearly worried over when I was a baby, probably in my
Hmm.
mom's womb. I mean, there's a very generational aspect to my own anxiety with my dad and the Jewish side of my family. I just was on a call with my whole Jewish family a couple weeks ago, and they said, "Oh, the
Mm,
name of your book, like, of course that, like, it resonates. Like, it's very much a common theme." And then I talk a little bit about epigenetics in the book and just the kind of generational curiosities I have towards traumatic events that may happen to a group of people, thinking about the Holocaust or thinking about the exile, just thinking about coming from a very old, long line of anxiety and how that might manifest personally in my own story. But then there's the kind of behavioral
mm,
piece, regardless of genetics. Like, certainly anxiety was reinforced and modeled throughout my life. Starting from when I was a baby, taken to the doctor every time I had a bee sting.
mm,
Before like you could Google medical symptoms, my dad had like a dictionary of medical diagnoses on the shelf in the spare bedroom and was always sort of body scanning or talking about it. So a lot of my own anxiety was very much focused on my own body. And
mm,
I don't know, I guess through therapy in the last 10 years or so, would have more of an official generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, I suppose. So that came a little bit later in adulthood, but looking back, like so many of us in our stories, you can kind of see the thread and pull it all the way to the beginning.
mm. Do you think that anxiety ends up sort of getting normalized in an anxious environment? Because I'm just thinking, like, if you're, I loved how I mean, it was just so aptly put. You were worried over from the day that you were born. Before that, even
Hmm.
if that was, such a difficult experience. But I'm
Hmm.
wondering about growing up in an anxious environment, because I think the question then would sort of
Yeah.
relate to where we
Yeah.
are in our current moment. That if
Hmm.
anxiety is so ubiquitous, is it
Hmm.
then kind of normalized and we don't even see it?
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is very common and very much happens. I think that the in a way, I almost think you could argue for that being a little bit easier. I think that the more we're aware sometimes, it's kind of like how when truth surfaces, it's always clarifying and important. It helps us understand ourselves, articulate our experiences better, but also it can be more complicated because I think sometimes, do I wish that my head was more in the sand and I just felt generally anxious and couldn't articulate it? No, but there is a sense in which it is easier to not be able to articulate those things. But I feel
Mm,
like when we begin to kind of understand those sorts of nuances, it helps us to ideally not just understand ourselves, but then be able to offer something out to other people. So that's theoretically what would hopefully happen if we can begin to kind of articulate some of the kind of weight of anxiety maybe we carry, if that's us.
hmm Which I think is what your book is really doing, right? Is helping us to kind of name, identify anxiety in these, in our bodies, in the
Mhm.
church body and in the body politic.
Mhm.
And I guess and I want to kind of talk about a lot of the different areas of anxiety that you touch on that are personally meaningful to me too, because I would also say that I feel
Mhm.
anxious about a lot of the things that you were talking about. But before
Mhm.
we go there, I want to just start out with, the person who says, you follow Jesus Christ, why are you anxious? Like if you are a truly faithful
Yeah.
Christian, you would
Yeah.
not be anxious. True or not
Yeah.
true?
Yeah, this is actually a really personal question for me because
Mm,
this is a question that has surfaced either
mm,
explicitly or that has been implied in some of my friendships and relationships over my life. This sense that if I prayed harder, like would the better Christian be able to not have the burden? The beginning stance being it is a problem and something that you should not have if you were
mm,
maybe more faithful. So there's been some like kind of messy theology and some strange implications there for me. But I think that honestly, to be anxious just means that we're human, and God meets us exactly where we are, and that's the incarnation. And I would also
mm,
argue that I think that anxious people, if you look at the opposite side of the coin, tend to be imaginative or be able to see things with a certain creative lens or maybe be good storytellers. Like I very much see my anxiety as being part of me and see like the gifts of it as well. And so I don't see how that could be something that the better Christian would not struggle with. In fact, I see it as being an asset, especially because it has built a certain kind of empathy or understanding or helps me better articulate a little bit of how I see the world that I think has connected with other people. So it feels in that way very liberating. So I think that it is very much a false premise that if we were better Christians, we wouldn't struggle. Although I think that
mm.
that's an old story, and I understand why some people might hold that false belief.
What do you think Jesus means then by don't be anxious? What are we supposed to take from that? And I'm
Yeah.
honestly asking because because I think there are a lot of people who sort of feel like, oh, well, then that just means like I have this like spigot,
Hmm.
right? And I feel anxious and I just like
Totally.
turn the spigot and I don't feel anxious anymore. And
Yeah.
I don't think it can mean that because I don't think we're necessarily in control in that way. But what do you think
Yeah.
Jesus wants for his people?
It's so provocative, isn't it? It's like this, it's this that specific verse, that part of the Beatitudes is something that as a young child I've struggled with. I've struggled with it
Mm,
my entire life because for many, many years I thought of it as something that was not obtainable and just not maybe for
mm,
me. It was a very problematic thing that I heard. And instead of it feeling like comfort, which maybe that's how it landed on the ears of some other kids in my Bible study, I just felt like a bit of panic because that did not resonate. I have now, in my adult life, very much
mm,
understood how the call to not be anxious is a constant driving towards us needing grace, us needing Jesus to meet us very much in the moment, very much a daily thing.
mm,
There's begun to be a certain freedom when I hear that because, the spoiler alert of the book. I mean, as you'll read in the first chapter, is God did not take my anxiety away, but He very much has met me in it through
mm,
different practices I did not understand growing up in the church I was in as a kid in the 80s, 90s. It is very much a deeper, truer articulation of my faith now when I think about God meeting me in the very presence of anxiety. So there's almost this inverse
mm,
freedom that's come through a call to the present all the time. And that has really required a constant understanding of God's love, God's presence, thinking about kind of constant prayer in that way. On a good day,
mm.
on a good day, Jen. But that's kind of how it's transformed.
It
Yeah.
makes me think of, James K. Smith, who talks about, I forget the title of his book that is on Charles Taylor's book, A
Mm,
Secular Age, but
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah,
it
yeah. I
you
can't remember
are
either.
whatever his book is that is basically distilling Taylor. But he says, this of doubt, like we're all Thomas now. We can't rid ourselves of doubt
Mhm,
in this age
mhm.
because doubt is just sort of endemic. And
Yeah.
I wonder if the same is kind of true of anxiety.
That's interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, that would certainly gel with the central argument of the book that the anxiety is very
Mm-hmm.
much in the system. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
practices like non-anxious presence, I talk about Edwin Friedman's work around non-anxious presence a little bit and some other practices kind of looking back a little bit because it's nothing new. But there does seem to be something about the time we are living in that demands the question, how do we live well? And by well, I mean present, close to God, close to our
Mm-hmm.
calling, loving our people in a very anxious era. There's just a central
Mm-hmm.
tension with that question right now that I think makes it feel more relevant, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about some of the localized anxieties. Just taking, I'll let you take what you want to take what you want to take, in what
Okay.
order you want to
Yeah.
take it. So you kind of talk about the anxieties of the body, and I think specifically like anxieties around aging. There's
Yeah.
anxieties around the aging bodies of your parents and caregiving anxieties. You've
Yeah.
obviously got anxieties within the church, and especially like within your church community that you've
Mm-hmm.
been a part of for more than 20 years now,
Yeah.
the kind of the ebbing and flowing and changing and evolving kind of
Yeah.
perspectives and practices. And then you've
Mm-hmm.
got, of course, anxiety in the body politic.
Yeah.
As we've seen just evangelicalism sort of overtaken by, I think you call it the
Mm-hmm.
Trumpification of the church, which was like,
Mm-hmm.
I think that sounds about right to me.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
which one of those do you want to take first? And it could just sort of describe your experience and
Yeah.
describe how we can see it in ourselves and some of the practices that have helped you. Um,
Yeah, I
mhm,
love this. I mean, I think it's a great question. I mean, thinking about the body and why my own anxiety around the body, why we are anxious about our bodies, the bodies of people we love. I think it's because we've been, again, just maybe will lead to desire again, but like disconnected from healthy desire and failed by
mm,
the promise of wellness culture. And I think that embodied practices have helped me learn to kind of be grounded from the inside out because we are, I mean, I'm in my late 40s. I am, as I know you've written about and think about, John, like I'm very much aware of the narrative that
mm,
I can buy my way or optimize my way to resisting, slowing down, reversing what is natural in terms of aging. And as a person that experiences health anxiety or body anxiety, there's a certain other deeper level there that really like reaches something older in me, so I think that
mm,
seeing the falseness of that, seeing the market in it. I mean, in Orphan Believers, I read a lot about consumerism and tracing that back to 80s and 90s. Growing up, going to the mall on Saturdays and church on Sundays, like my whole life being a sort of
mm,
suburban kid in Indiana to now, I think I've been able to trace the market a little bit. But the particular wellness sort of narrative. Like I talk about in the book how I tried dryuary because I'd have some wine, a glass of wine before dinner. Thought maybe a month without that would help. I started to make like congee and soft, fed myself like stews. I like started to drink a lot of turmeric juice. Like I had a whole month really trying. And actually, I looked up. I was just trying to take care of myself in a time when my dad was sick
mm,
and my mom's
mhm,
Parkinson's disease dementia was. I was trying to be caring, and that was a lovely thing. But I was also very much, without thinking about it, trying to tap into this sort of formula that I thought would make me feel better, because I was seeing that on Instagram, right? And the truth is, I
mm,
felt a little better. I did. I had a lot of vegetables that month. I did feel a little bit better, but it certainly did not tap into the sort of soul level kind of searching and lack that I was feeling in that era. It just didn't. And that was a
mm,
maybe a year before I started the Ignatian exercises. That was kind of an inflection point where I realized like I need to find something else because the kind of prayer I was doing, which was very much like a pleading, sort of listing out fear and what I was really just kind of like emptying my mind in prayer and God help. Just I wanted a different understanding of how to see Jesus in the
mm,
very presence of a lot of struggle. So that for me, and then the other, I also write in the book about, I've got a daughter who's 13, my mom who's near the end of life. She's 84 pounds, very like advanced osteoporosis, falling from Parkinson's. Just her body is at the end of life, and I just at one point saw my daughter's hand. We were somewhere. I think we were visiting her, but I saw all of our hands together and I saw like where
mm,
my hand was in the middle. And I just felt like, gosh, I wish there was a way instead of feeling anxious about seeing my hand change or the wrinkle. Like I just wish there was a way to like thank God and be present and at
Mm,
rest and accept as the gift of life that it is to be 47 in this body with these limitations. Because
mm.
obviously we're all temporarily able-bodied, right? So I talk a little bit about that. That's just one piece. And that felt like a lot, but there's of course other stuff too with the church and politics I can talk about. But
Hmm.
I feel like I should stop talking for a second.
No, well, catch your breath, but I think talking about aging anxiety is just so important. It's just I feel like we don't have a lot of models about how to age well as women.
Yeah.
Um, And I have a certain curiosity about this for sure because I feel like men are, I mean, of course, men are allowed to age, but men have like a new, different kind of imperative around aging. You know, it's remaining
Hmm.
strong, whereas women have to remain young, you know,
Yep,
young
that's right.
and beautiful if they were
That's right.
ever, you know, if they ever were. And so it's just, yeah, there's a whole conversation about that. But
Hmm.
why don't you actually talk about a little bit about your caregiving anxieties? Because this was like a
Yeah.
particular theme in the book that really resonated with me. As you know, as we've talked about before, I moved to Cincinnati to care for my mom who has dementia. I like to, I need to rephrase that, manage the care of my mom because
Yep.
you were doing
Yep.
a lot of like actual hands-on caregiving. So tell
No,
us a little bit about
I'm
that.
glad you said that actually. And I've been thinking about that. You know,
Mm,
there have been seasons when my parents were here for 6 months a couple of years ago and we were managing daily care. There have been seasons, my dad was here a couple weeks ago. He has advanced multiple myeloma, blood cancer. He's towards
mm,
end of life and he was here after a hospitalization and we were managing 24/7 care. But the truth is my mom lives in memory care and there are professionals that wonderfully care for her. My dad is now, as of a week and a
mm,
half ago, in an adult family home. And so I think that many of our roles in terms of the tactical, like diaper changing, sheet changing, caregiving, certainly waxes and wanes. And so I'm really glad you said that because I think it's important
mm,
for people to understand that there's certainly nuance. And
mm,
yes, but in terms of that season, boy, I think that the
mm,
anxiety of limitation was so present. My friend Tony, cared for both of his parents while working full time, and I work full time. I have two kids. I'm a writer and talking about this book, and then my parents are. It is so a different kind of time, kind
mm.
of like when you have a newborn and you go into this different world where time feels bendy and just more present. And I feel like when you are with a person that is unwell or caring for parents, you move into their time. And that time may be 10
Mm,
minutes to get to the bathroom. That time may be transporting to an appointment where it would be, if it was me, I would just pay for parking and run in. But we have like, oh, we need to find a wheelchair and we need to figure out where. So the sort of lack of
mhm,
quote productivity and the productivity culture, the tension that is so paramount, it almost seems absurd in situations like that. And so the sort of natural inclination I have to like get it done, to be administrative, to do more, so
mm,
that I feel in control, because anxiety is certainly about managing a lack of control, is tested all the time when I'm caring for them. And the thing that
mm,
I realized at one point, I was listening to a writer that I like on a podcast. I think I mentioned this in the book, and she just said that she decided to not care for her. She decided to kind of go low contact or no contact with her parents because she knew that it would very much compromise her creative life and professional life, and she chose to
mm,
opt out. And my first feeling was just swift judgment. How could anybody not care for their parents? And then, Jen, I felt just a wave of like jealousy or like a longing for that. And I thought,
mm,
oh, there's something
mhm,
here I've got to figure out. There's a disordered desire here that I need to understand. So
mm,
I sat with it for a while. I prayed about it and I began to understand that like I am choosing to care for them because I love them and also because there is something that comes from limits that forms us well. And man,
mhm,
I don't judge that person for making that choice about deciding to have professional freedom. I long for that sometimes. I imagine a literary life or a professional life where I could sit and focus or work on an essay. But the truth is, and I think we know that like as parents or busy
mhm,
people, like we just get work done when we can. And if there's a scarcity of time, it can be motivating in a healthy way. And I don't know. I'm going, well,
mhm,
I guess all that to say,
mm,
my care for them is limited and it is imperfect. I am not an Enneagram 2. I am not a natural caregiver. I, for a long time, felt anxiety around how I care. Our care is
Mm,
not, let me just put a shawl around you and let's walk around the park, Dad, and tell me how. It's like, do I need to
mm.
help with your medicine right now? How can I get you? Like I was with him this morning at the care home. And he said, I really want a dilly bar from Dairy Queen. And I said, well, Dad,
Of course.
I've got to go do some work after this, but the next time I come, and then I'm walking out of the room, he says, "Don't
Yes.
forget 2 dilly bars." So that is the kind of care. So I am so I'm now less I am less anxious about being
Mm.
perfect. I do what I can and I try to be present when I can. So
Mm. I think
yeah.
people should read the book, I mean, for that theme alone, for the exploration of caregiving as a good, but as something that is truly also human and hard. It's not like we're just suddenly
Yeah,
angelic and all of a sudden we assume care for our aging parents and, we never speak an ill word. We do. We do. We get
I'm so glad you
frustrated.
said that.
And I think there's a lot of invitation to move toward caregiving, but in a very realistic way, and to understand the cost that it will exact of your life. It's just so interesting how we all want to have a society where care is a good and care is something that we can receive, but nobody wants to take the time to care. And it
That's
truly,
right.
I mean, that's what my whole last book I think was about, was just like
Mhm.
time, just this way in which caregiving, as you already said, reorders your perspective on time. And there's
Yeah,
something incredibly beautiful about moving a little bit more slowly too, even when it's
that's right.
frustrating. And I feel like the worst days with my mom are the days when I am running late and I want to hurry her along. And it's like, no,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
way better to leave a lot of time to kind of move slowly so that I'm not frustrated and so that she's not frustrated.
I know we have other things to talk about, but I have to this that reminded me of one other thing that happened. I
Please.
realized I realized last week that I have been trying to manage because of anxiety, because of control, how to like care for them and do other things. Last Wednesday, it was the
Mm.
day after the book came out, so I guess it was 2 Wednesdays ago. I had imagined this sort of, this wonderful kind of comforting, whatever. I imagined this like, oh, I can relax and feel like so joyful. And instead, I had to take my mom to the neurologist and then my dad to the oncologist. The whole day, I woke up and I knew it was a caregiving day. And I told myself, you know what? I'm not going to try to squeeze stuff in. I'm not going to do social media. I am just going to let myself be present with them. And that is very
Mm.
against my nature. I always want to keep pushing, finding 30-minute blocks. Again, I'm a victim of productivity culture and it's a lifelong thing I'm unlearning, right? But I was driving my mom through, we were going through downtown
Mm.
Seattle towards the towards a neurologist. And this Boys of Summer came on, the Don Henley song from the 80s, I can see your brown skin shine. And my mom loves that song. And I think that often with dementia patients, they may remember lyrics more. And so
Mhm.
she remembered the lyrics. She started singing some of them, the
Oh.
chorus. And then I was singing with her, and downtown Seattle was next to us, and we were singing together and
Mm.
present. And I honestly, Jen, have not felt that like connected to her. She was in a lucid moment. And I thought about how, as a kid growing up, I was always kind of like, wore like thrift store, like weird trousers for old people at the time. And I wore like wacky maxi dresses from the side. I was just like a very kind of arty, kind of awkward kid. I was not like the kind of kid. My mom was like very beautiful and very like poised. And she's just, I'm like edited person. She's a different kind of person. But I realized, oh, like she always like loved me and let me be. So I just took her hand and we were singing
Mm.
this Don Henley song. And I said, Mom, thank you for loving me as I am and like seeing me, even my whole life,
Mm.
even back then. And she just looked at me and she's like, Sarah, I've always loved you for who you are. And it was like this, I mean, it was like this
Oh
most
my
beautiful
goodness.
moment. And I thought, if nothing else, gosh, I can't even, it's like if nothing else, that I'll carry that with me. And I think it's because I let
Mm.
myself calm down and be present. So, I've been thinking about that
That is
moment a lot, so I
incredible.
just had to share it.
That's so beautiful. And you wouldn't have been present for it had you not shown up to the task of caregiving.
Not
Like
at all.
you don't get the beautiful moments if you don't also like have the difficult and harrowing moments too,
Yeah.
and yeah, that last week I was just telling my husband this, that I went to visit my mom, and usually when I like, knock on the door and open the door and she sees me, she's like, "It's my daughter." And because I
So
don't know that
joyful.
she always remembers my name now, so it's always like, it's my daughter. And
Yeah.
last week it was, "It's my my person." I was like, "Well, that's right. I'm your person." And there's wow. Like,
Yeah.
it's just amazing the small joys that can be experienced,
Yeah.
just to be recognized as your person, to
It's
like
so
be able to
good.
grab your mom's hand and to sing a song and to be able to say thank you. I really
Yeah.
think like caregiving is a way that I'm experiencing at least a kind of I mean, I think it's a restitution. I think it's an act of restitution
Mm,
for a lot of
that's
ingratitude in my
beautiful.
own life.
Gosh.
Um, to be able to say truly with my life and my, not just my words, but my actions, like, I love you and I'm so thankful
Mm,
for the way you cared for me, you know?
that's such a good word. That's a good word, friend. Yeah. I love that.
Hmm.
Mm.
It's I mean, yeah, so we won't talk all conversation about caregiving, but I think it's such a prominent theme and it's so beautiful. Let's talk about church anxiety. And on to an easier topic. Church anxiety. Can you talk to
Yeah.
us a little bit about how you have experienced that?
Yeah. I mean, I've gone to the same church in Seattle for 21 years. The first Sunday we got to town, I moved from Indiana. My husband's from Baltimore. We got here, went to
Mm.
Grace, had this idea. We heard that there was this church where like musicians that we liked, like kind of cool Christian musicians that were still making good music, like all went to this place. And so it was sort of mythic. And we got there. They had all kind of left by the time we landed. But
It was less
had
cool.
it was a little less cool, but no, like PCA Church out of the Tim Keller kind of like return to the city vibe. This is like a planted in the mid to late 90s.
Hmm.
Very kind of heady sermons that we really liked. Very liturgical in a way that was new, coming from a Christian and Missionary Alliance slash non-denominational background. Beautiful music and strings, just a really different kind of experience. So we loved
Mm.
it. I didn't really know anything about Presbyterianism or the PCA, and I just liked this church. And we landed around the time that Mars Hill was really growing in
Mm.
Seattle. This was
Okay.
around the time there was this kind of Sunday football stadium Easter service. So there was this kind of like volatile, tangible tension that we like landed in the city where people were
Mm.
defensive. There were like the Alt Weekly had various headlines around Mars Hill owned coffee companies. It was like a big beat. It was like a clickbait thing. And so we landed in a
Interesting.
time where it felt complicated to talk about being a Christian. I mean, I had lived in New York and San Francisco for a while, and nothing felt
Hmm.
like this. And I now very much understand it in retrospect. So Grace felt like this little kind of pocket of rest amongst a broader context of like a
Mm.
lot of kind of confusion and like why is this so hostile? And so I got really good at not talking about my faith ever at work or in the rest of my
Hmm.
life. I became very truncated, and so church became a place where I kind of hung out, but I didn't really meet anybody. I was very introverted. Felt like I was managing two
Mm.
identities. And so I write in the book about how I just kind of for a long time, like maybe 8 or 10 years, was just pretty anonymous. And it's funny because Grace is a good place to be
Mm.
anonymous if you need to be. After Mars Hill imploded in 2014, we doubled from like 150 to 300 in a weekend
Oh
because
my
Grace
goodness.
again is a very good place to kind of like rest and be restored. And since then, a lot of folks have left the
Mm.
church, found different churches. That was just sort of a intense season. All that to say, I was
Mm.
anonymous and that worked until it didn't. And so I write in the book about how I finally went to this women's retreat after avoiding it for years. And I
I
and
love
I
this story.
and I went, it was like a breakout session the first night, and I was just very introverted. And the leader of the breakout group said, "Everyone introduce yourself." And I said, "Hi, I'm Sarah." She said, "How long have you been going to Grace?" And I said, "Oh, eight
Mm.
years." And she said, "Why haven't we seen you before?" And it wasn't said in meanness. It was just she was very
Mm-mm.
curious. But my heart just fell out of my body. I thought, oh, something is not working. So,
Mhm.
I was very anxious about my place and belonging, and if I was supposed to be there, and what the church meant for me in a broader sense. It was not until 2014, 15 that a woman named Debbie Tacky Smith came on staff as our community formation director and brought many beautiful contemplative practices. Again, this is the mid
Mm,
2010s when a lot of contemplation was kind of emerging in various evangelical or evangelical aligned churches, and so my whole identity, sense of belonging in the church, everything shifted with her. We started doing direction. We moved towards more leadership. I was a deacon. Drew became an elder. It was just, we felt like a
mm,
sense of belonging, purpose, something really, we really relaxed into some of these practices. There were half-day retreats. We were meeting people. It was so healthy, so different.
mm,
Then the pandemic
mm.
happened. Is this too long of an answer? I'm just
No,
anyways,
not at all.
okay,
You're
just
not rambling. You're
the
incredibly succinct.
Okay, cool. So the pandemic happened, and then there was a season where within the PCA, we're in Seattle, but the sort of regional, not diocese, regional presbytery is made up of churches in Alaska, Idaho, Eastern Washington, all over. There was a lot of criticism that a practice that was kind of accepted, that women would be able to be deacons at Grace, was then uh, questioned. We were asked to de-deacon the ladies. That did not
Mm,
feel, that felt very damaging and harming, and we weren't going to do that. And so after a maybe 2 year long process, decided to leave the PCA, moved to an Anglican diocese called Church for the Sake of Others. Um, that was very intense because the whole church collectively voted to leave one denomination and move to another. Again, another very imperfect. I mean, the ACNA
mm.
certainly is, it's a difficult time to be a Christian in any denomination ever, and that certainly is true now.
Yep.
So it's not like, I think we had our eyes open as much as we could, but have really loved Church for the Sake of Others, have like felt good about it. But there was a lot of anxiety around this vote. Would people leave? What would happen? In the end, I think 89% of the congregation voted to stay. And folks
Okay.
that wanted to or voted to, sorry, rather leave the PC, leave and move to the
Oh,
Anglican Church. Sorry, and then the folks that wanted to stay mostly said we feel like we should try to change the Book of Church Order. We should try to change from within. And the leadership team that I was on, Andrew, were so tired, and I just thought like our
uh,
job is not to sort of change the Book of Church Order; it's to pour into the congregation. And COVID made us, we were just tired. So, anyways,
mm,
that happened, and then we had a whole other discernment around women in leadership, which was also a year long, very intentional, involving a lot of prayer, a lot of meetings, a lot of reading together, a lot of studying as the church. Again, 150 of us. It was a beautiful process, and
mm,
90 some percent of folks voted for women to be able to be priests. And so our Jamie came on as our first priest, and that Sunday when she first preached, I said to Sabine, I said, Sabine, look, Jamie's preaching. This is like amazing. It's a beautiful. And she said, well, why wouldn't she be? It was so funny. It was like this classic, like, why wouldn't she be preaching? It was a
this is
very, yeah, it
your
was,
daughter,
yes, my
right? Yeah.
12. It was a
Hmm.
very, like, it was a very funny kid-like response. So the church has been through a whole lot, and it feels amazing to be on this side of it. So now I'm on the vestry. Drew's a priest. It's a whole other story. So we're quite involved. And I talk in the book about the Benedictine vows of stability and fidelity, and the
Hmm.
idea of staying and being rooted even when things are difficult. There were many
Hmm.
years when we thought about leaving the church, leaving Seattle, did a Quaker Clearness Committee, spent a long time discerning, and decided around 2018 we were going to stay. And Jen, the amount of like weight off of
Mm,
our shoulders, not having one foot out the door, I began to pray actively for Seattle, for my neighborhood. I'm very invested in being here, very rooted here, even though it's complicated, and began to let
mm,
myself love our church, love my neighborhood, love this city. And that really shifted something in me. I became less anxiously looking or wondering what was next and much more present and much more focused. That's been a big church shift, I suppose.
hmm. It's such a beautiful story because I think change is always I mean, I experience it as a source of anxiety, as I think many people do,
Yeah.
and uncertainty, and so you're narrating this whole story about how your church is encountering all of that, change, uncertainty, periods of discernment, waiting, prayerful,
Yeah.
communal conversation, and you don't really hear a lot of stories like that. It's just such a hopeful story. And I also think, of course, when you talked about Benedict, which I've been doing a lot of work with Benedict, and that's sort of like the heart of my next book. But I
Oh,
think this idea of like stability as a choice to kind of this choice to be rooted and
yeah.
foreclose, the million options that are sort of open out there. Like, well, maybe
Yeah.
we won't stay, and maybe we'll, go here or go there. And I
Mm.
think sometimes we think keeping those options open is a way to I don't know, you know manage the anxiety. Like, well, I can
Yeah.
always leave. But in
Yeah,
some ways, it actually
totally.
kind of stokes it.
Absolutely. The idea of choosing to stay sometimes is very freeing and maybe
Mm-hmm.
countercultural, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
inversely you would think you would feel restricted, but there's something very beautiful in committing to people if it feels healthy and safe, and we are very grateful that right now, it does and has. So
Mm-hmm.
my eyes are open to the loveliness that we are in a healthy church, and that is certainly, so I'm not naive
Mm-hmm.
about that either. But yes, it
Mm-hmm.
feels really good to stay, and I also know that there are some, for
Mm-hmm.
many friends, reasons to go. So it's
Sure.
my own
Yeah.
personal kind of take.
I love hearing Russell Moore talk about, he's just had so many conversations, public conversations about the decision to leave the SBC
Hmm.
and the reasons why that might not be everybody else's reasons. They may choose to stay
Yeah.
rather than to
Yeah.
leave. So,
Exactly.
um, I let's end our conversation just kind of talking about the political anxiety because of
Yeah.
course I think I kind of after Orphaned Believers, like I came to this book thinking, yeah, for sure this is going to be the heart of the book, and it 100% is, a third of the book, because you're talking about anxiety in our body politic. um you kind
Yeah.
of end up in a place where you make a shift politically, and so why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I got to the point where I realized that my well-being was sort of linked to an outcome, to a political
Mm,
identity, and that is very much stoking anxiety. The body politic is anxious. There are so many anxiety responses all around if you just train your eyes to look for it. And I just felt like my well-being was too connected, and my identity, who I was too connected to my political identity. And so
mm,
I'm not saying to not have a political identity. I have a lot of political
mm-hmm,
opinions, but I am saying that I'm hoping to say that as Christians, our call is to be open-handed about our identity, and that we should substantially have our political identity and politics in checked by our faith constantly, as a constant filter, as so our faith has to question our political loyalty, as opposed to our political loyalty then being a thing that questions our faith. So that's certainly, I think, the right order of things. And I don't know, Jen, like when Orphan Believers came out in
mm,
2023, it was the sense was like everybody had, maybe there was an uncle into Pizzagate or QAnon, or maybe Thanksgiving was weird because there were political differences with like your parent, but everybody wanted to reach across the Thanksgiving table or the aisle or whatever. Like the sentiment was connecting. And this time, I don't know, I
mm.
posted something on Instagram, I think before the last election, saying Jesus loves Donald Trump, Jesus loves Kamala Harris, or something very simple, very basic, I'd say biblical. And I was just like kind of skewered.
Oh,
It was
wow.
there. It was a surprising. It's like it was a surprising and intense response, and I feel like the division and the blowback. There's just so much rhetoric about not tolerating difference, because then it's almost like our identity. If we try to reach across the aisle now, it's like we're kind of contaminated by the person that believes something different. It's almost like a contagion.
Mm,
So to be
mhm,
okay, it's an anxiety response, but to be okay, we need to make sure that we're clear. And so we cannot identify with an oppressive other, because we may then be implicated, you know? And so I feel like there's
mm,
just a real problem right now in political anxiety that is, in the last few years, even emerged and changed. So where does that lead? I mean, how is there any hope of
mm,
reconciliation or connection? That is almost an act of war. Like if we are so burrowed down on either side, like nothing can or will shift or change. And so I have to
mm,
believe that there is a way, modeling by the way of Jesus, to be non-anxious, to be secure, to be able to, with love, look across the aisle again. And I do still believe the church is the best way to do that, even in our
mm,
very, very broken state. I do believe that if we're the gathered body of believers, that if Jesus made the church and is what he left us with, that is the best hope that we have for connection. And I say that, and I feel like it sounds very Pollyanna and naive, but yet I believe it is in right order true. And so I have to hope that is the case. And
mm,
even maybe that's not in our lifetime. I don't know, but I know that that's what I'm very much feel called, and Drew and I feel called to work for. We feel our purpose is very much around that work, I suppose. So
mhm.
yeah.
Well, you kind of work through the alternatives, right? Like you are describing like our politically anxious moment, and
Hmm.
you've got the working theories, right? Especially like around the I Trumpification of the church,
Yeah,
which
that's right.
I also lament, and deeply grieve as I think I've been able to articulate it recently to myself. It's less that I think people can disagree politically. And so, MAGA is a particular kind of political expression, one that I don't find a lot of sympathy for or a lot of resonance with. But, when it as a political identity, it's one thing. As an
Mhm.
expression of Christian faith,
Mhm.
to me, it's something entirely different. And I've just
Absolutely.
decided that I want to be clear about, when I'm talking to people, like, are we talking about MAGA as politics? Or are we talking about MAGA as an expression of American sort of Christian identity? Because if we're
Mhm.
talking about
Nationalism.
politics, like, I can agree to maybe disagree.
Yeah.
But if we're going to talk about, it as Christian faith, then, or as an expression of the gospel, then I'm like, oh, actually,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I,
Let's
I,
talk
I
about
don't.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, you're talking about your working theories. You've got three, and you're talking to your husband Drew, and then he adds a fourth.
Mhm.
And I just think it's really
Yeah.
helpful to kind of think through those.
Yeah, I talk about three ways to kind of respond to this moment, right? To this as a Trumpification of the church moment, and the first would be to check out, to kind of Benedict option, to remove yourself if you have the access and luxury of resources to do that, to maybe go off grid. I talk a little bit about some of that kind of culture. You can check. We have the choice to check out if we have access to it, right? The second would be to distance ourselves, to kind of like further hunker down in wherever we are. And then that would lead to this option of aggressively, vocally sometimes pushing back. So I could spend my time as a Christian with clear convictions about Christian nationalism doing that. And honestly, Jen, I mean, I have. There was a while
Mm-hmm.
around 2023. It's interesting because I'm so clear about it that I felt very compelled to talk about it publicly online. And I
Mm,
don't regret that, but I do regret
mm,
I think I do see like how it takes a toll on your like on the soul, on my spiritual health. There's just this like um there's a certain weight to it. And so I don't know that that really makes a
mm,
difference. I don't know what minds or hearts are really changed. We just sort of find what we want to find online or in conversations and kind of go with it. That just didn't lead anywhere with me. Then this other
mm,
idea to hold fast and live faithfully, though, that Drew, we were having this conversation. She's like, I think there's this other way. I think we can just
mm,
hold fast and just live as people who love Jesus. And that means that our eyes are open, we're aware, we can be politically literate, we can hold opinions, but what we can also do is like learn how to lose, like
mm,
we don't have to win. We can loosen our grip, and then we can try to practice this. And what I, move towards at the end of the book is this Jesuit idea of indifference, of holy indifference, of opening our hands to any outcome, saying, Jesus, whatever it is, if I'm convicted and convinced of your love and goodness and
mm,
nearness and acting in this situation, like let me stop making it so much about my identity or about the need to get my point
mm,
across, the need to win the argument, the need for the certain outcome. Like, is there a way that I can let go a little bit and learn how to lose? Because obviously that was very much the story of Jesus on the cross, right? That's like our
mm,
model. So there's something really good in there that I'm really trying to kind of use as a guide as I kind of move in this other political season and into the future and raise kids in this world and all that other stuff.
mm. I had to I was like, oh, I just want to add a fifth based on the sermon yesterday because it was just so
Yeah.
good. And I think I could just encourage people. But we have been learning from the book of Habakkuk, which
I'm
isn't a
surprised
book
you can
that
say, I can barely say that book. So, but just as a
I know it's
awesome.
like, is it Habakkuk or Habakkuk? But I think they're saying Habakkuk. So I'm going to go with that. But they basically say that the premise of the book is that, God, like Habakkuk's like, how long? How long are you going to let the violence? Just sort of run rampant in the land. And he's talking
Hmm.
about in Israel, and God's like, well, I've got a plan. How about I bring the Babylonians to like basically like
Yeah.
execute justice against Israel? And Habakkuk's like, I don't like this idea. Like, what is
Yeah.
this about? Like, the people who are even more violent than us, you're going to bring them to judge us.
Mm.
Um, and so, anyways, yesterday our pastor was just talking about how in at the end of chapter 2, there's just this taunt, like Habakkuk
Mhm.
taunts the Babylonians, and not because he actually knows they're going to lose. He knows like Babylon
Mhm.
is going to conquer Israel, and yet
Mhm.
it's this deeper hope and trust in God's justice.
That's
And
good.
one of the
Yeah.
things that our pastor mentioned is just that the thing that tyrants like least is to not be taken seriously. So when you laugh at them, it's like the worst thing. And that's of course, what we saw with Jimmy Kimmel, and why,
Yeah.
comedy, like you see that sort of in dictatorial, like autocratic societies, like
And
you
the
have to shut
Portland
down.
ice protests and, like, the
Right.
Portland costumes. Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah.
So anyways, it was just so encouraging. I was like, that allows me a little bit of levity, like kind of God's divine levity, to laugh.
I
God
love
in
that.
derision laughs, Psalm 2. And that's not a, like, taking lightly what actually should be taken very seriously. Just as in, and
Absolutely.
I think let's let the whole last word be on like holy indifference. It's
Mhm.
not to say that you're resigned, right? Why don't you
Yeah.
talk, just as we finish this conversation, about the Ignatian and idea of holy indifference, what it is and what it isn't, and how this sort of relates to the whole question of anxiety.
Yeah, I think that I mean, Ignatius would say holy indifference is the ability to choose the things that glorify God. Like the idea
Mm,
of he talks about different binaries, fame or disgrace, health or illness, a long life or a short life. That's yes, that's just the way I'm kind of talking about it, my own interpretation. But like just whatever the binaries might be. I love fame or disgrace, thinking about ego and social media,
mhm,
by the way. But whatever it is, can you take any situation and open your palms and say, God, if you are good, may the outcome be the thing that glorifies you, without us knowing the full story, without us knowing the end, without our own
mm,
will getting in the way or trying to sort of block that. And to me, man, Jen, that is it has
mm,
changed. It has changed everything. It is something I think about multiple times a day, every day in big and small ways. It is with me. It is a practice that is like embedded in the way that I pray now. Um, because I
mm,
think that it is a perfect partner to, if you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety, like the idea of when something becomes bigger, it pushes harder against the door if you push back against it. Like the idea of letting God's will
mm,
come and flow is so healing, but you have to first believe, of course, that God loves you and that that love is true, and then also also believe that God is near and close. And Ignatius says, "What all is gift, and God in all things." Like we have to first be
mm,
convicted and convinced of being loved, and so that part, the whole love part, I think I prayed for
mm,
2 years, various verses around love in the morning to try to understand that I'd not metabolized or really received that in my life. And then doing the Ignatian exercises, which is this, if folks don't know, this 9 month, I did the 19th annotation, which is this kind of modified 9 month
mm.
retreat where you pray for an hour in the morning. Some folks go away for a month if they can, but that's obviously not very realistic for many of us. But
How
I
lovely.
but I would pray in the morning for an hour or so, right? And then meet with a spiritual director once a week, and um, just like had a very interesting reordering of how I would understand prayer. Like you start by just sitting, in God's presence and trying to sense God's love for as long as that takes. And that really
Mm,
grounds then the kind of praying. And there are a lot of invitations to sort of list through from birth on, like your sort of consolations and desolations, where God's been near, where there's been seasons without God. And it just helps you pay attention to sort of themes and bigger threads. And the idea of
mm,
inviting indifference to outcomes is a wonderful call to the present, and it is a wonderful way to sort of diffuse or neutralize anxiety, which is often so future focused. And so,
mm,
even like here's like a very kind of present light
mm,
example, like marketing this, like talking about this book. I'm in the season where I'm talking about this book. The truth is, no, the book may
mm,
do well. The book may not in terms of sales. Like whatever happens with this book, like it feels so personally entwined to me
mm,
and my calling and my gift. It is a very personal book, But I've gotten to
Mhm.
the point where again and again in the last couple months, I'm just like, "God, do what you wanna do with the book. Like, let it connect with people. Like, please just let me not hold on to the book and, like, attach my identity,
Mm.
the market, success. I would all of let me not do that." So that's, like, a very practical daily thing. Comes up in
Mm.
parenting all the time with my kids, all the time. So, it's been a pretty big shift.
Hmm.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, I almost did the exercises. Trying to remember if that was last fall. I think, and then I was like, wait, and then the director who
Mhm.
was offering them said, if you need to be realistic about your year,
Yeah.
and what it might include. And I thought, well, maybe not the year that I'm writing a book.
Yeah,
Although it
that's right.
sounds like, I mean, you were writing the book, weren't you? When you were
Yeah,
you
yeah,
were
but,
going through your Doctor of Ministry program, at least.
yeah, but
Yeah,
it's kind of like there's always something going on and it's always busy and it's never the right year. But B,
that's true.
sometimes it's really not the right year. So it sounds
Yeah.
like you're able to be really, you're able to know yourself well enough to know that. So yeah,
Hmm.
I can't recommend them enough, and I hope I can do them again, but geez, not for a while. Although when I was done, it's just such a time of like nearness and goodness, like sensing God,
Mm.
that it just felt like who am I gonna be, how do I go on not doing this? Like, what do I do now?
Yes.
Really a bit of
Right.
like a letdown.
Hmm.
So I began to be interested more in like fasting or other like, just wondering who I am now. I am different and changed, but I really miss them. And I wish I could do them
Mm.
all the time, but I'm also it's intense. So I'm also glad that you're not doing them.
You're also caring for your parents and raising children and working full time and writing a book and marketing a book and.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking about Sarah Billups' book, Nervous System: Spiritual Practices to Calm Anxiety in Your Body in the Church and in Politics. So I really hope that you guys will check it out. And Sarah, where can people find you?
Thanks so much, Jen. This has been I've loved this conversation. Gosh, I feel very filled
Good.
up.
Me too.
I'm on Instagram at Sarah.Billups, and then I write Bitter Scroll on Substack.
Okay. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Jen.